from the age of the thought police.
Recognized gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, Mr. McCall said the border is wide open. Director Wray testified about an elevated threat of guns and money and drugs across the border. Mr. Guest laid out a lot of the details about the record-breaking numbers. Ended up having to talk more than get an answer from you on something. I just want to ask you, I've heard you and the Judiciary Committee recently in the summer testify that the border is secure. Secretary Mayorkas, do you continue to maintain that the border is secure?
Yes, and we are working day in and day out to enhance its security, Congressman.
Right. Thanks, sir.
We have remarkable.
I get it. I just wanted to make sure that still is your assessment. Director Wray,
it is, and it's very important, if I may.
Well, I know there's just not enough time for a lot of explanation, and you've got written testimony and so forth. I just wanted to understand that that's your position still. I think it is a position that denies reality, respectfully, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to say, no, I think the situation's changed or something like that. Director Wray, do you believe that the border is secure? Right. Director Abizaid, does the NCTC assess a significant threat from the historic level of uncontrolled crossing at the southern border?
Thank you. We don't, actually. It's been striking how the evolution to lone actors actually reflects how much more difficult it is for terrorists to enter into the United States. We look historically at the kind of attacks we've experienced here in the homeland.
It makes me mindful of the 9/11 report, that chapter that said the system was blinking red. It was a failure of the United States government agencies to anticipate a threat that should have been obvious to everyone. So it troubles me that the official response is, we don't think that's much of a threat. We have an unprecedented number of people coming across the border. A lot of them are being interdicted, but released into the United States without enough scrutiny. A whole lot more apparently coming in without being interdicted at all. And the official answer is, we don't think there's a terrorism problem there. It just hadn't happened in the past. I think, unfortunately, we're going to find out if it happens in the future. Secretary Mayorkas, does the level of interaction with social media platforms, and that one specifically, that anecdote, not suggest that DHS is engaged in egregious overreach that threatens the First Amendment?
Congressman, I would note that the Intercept article focused its attention on the disinformation activities that preceded our administration. Let me assure you that our work to address disinformation, which is a tool that our nation-state adversaries seek to employ to sow discord in this country, is something that is very, very respectful of the civil rights and civil liberties of individuals, as well as their privacy rights.
You maintain that always, but let me just ask, when you say it's respectful, are you attempting to conduct censorship by proxy as a means of evading the First Amendment?
We absolutely do not.
My time's expired.
Gentleman's time has expired for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well, and appreciate greatly the commentary that you both gave earlier with reference to collegiality and an effort to get the optimum from this committee based upon the things that we can agree upon. Mr. Chairman and members, I'm on a mission of mercy today. I'm on a mission of mercy because of our immigration laws and a need for comprehensive immigration reform. Mr. Secretary, the case of one Mr. Jaime Avalos Rosales, and because he went back as a child, he is now barred for 10 years. Won't be with his baby. Won't have Christmas with the child. If it doesn't impact one's heart, I'm just sorry for the lack of sympathy and empathy that some people may have. So I'm appealing for some help. He came as a child. The border is about as secure as it can be given the laws that we have. Immigration reform, so that we can deal with the situations that include Mr. Jaime Avalos Rosales.
From New Jersey for 5 minutes, Mr. Vandrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Just very briefly, I think our immigration system, respectfully, we are not doing as good as we could do, and I believe that we could do much, much better. And quite frankly, we were doing much, much better. We were doing much, much better. Secretary Mayorkas, when you testified before this committee in September of last year, you stated that DHS continues enforcing our immigration laws, and to my surprise, you said that we were responsibly managing our border. It's not rocket science, it's not complicated, the American public can see it, everybody can see it, and it affects the whole country. But instead of having just one problem, now we have two problems because of what we're doing to the air marshals. Enough is enough. Why can't we just do the right thing, the simple thing, and the functional thing? Why can't we go back to where we were, where we had so much less of a problem?
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
The number of unaccompanied alien children, UACs, encountered along the southwest border has nearly doubled since 2019 and continues to increase, surpassing a record high in fiscal year 2021, approaching nearly 153,000 this fiscal year. We've heard reports of children being sent alone. I've encountered them when I've made trips to the border across dangerous terrain with nothing but a relative's name and address pinned on their shirt. Some of these children so young as to not know their own name or to whom they're supposed to be sent.
A few thoughts, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for capturing the vulnerability of unaccompanied children that migrate from their countries of origin and seek safety, not only in the United States, but elsewhere in the hemisphere. As I said at the very outset, I don't know.
Sir, I want to be respectful. I have limited
yes,
time, so.
That this is a challenge that we are experiencing throughout the hemisphere. I also want to thank you for recognizing the bravery of the Border Patrol.
Thank you very much. I'm going to relate back to my instances of appearing at the border and hearing directly from people crossing the border that the administration's policies, in fact, are a pull factor. Given that, what actions are being taken at the department to keep these kids safe, and stem the flow of UACs crossing illegally into the United States across dangerous terrain?
So a few things. Of course, I disagree with the premise of the pull factor. And as I was saying, this is a hemispheric challenge. We're seeing a tremendous amount of upheaval throughout the Western Hemisphere, authoritarian regimes, poverty, violence, corruption, and the like. We are doing a number of things, and let me give you two examples. One is we're taking it to the smugglers in an unprecedented way. Throughout the Department of Homeland Security, throughout the interagency, and with our partner countries to the south of our border. We have, in the last year, conducted more than 6,000 arrests in an unprecedented disruption effort to attack the smuggling organizations that seek to exploit the vulnerable.
Thank you. And I can just say that when I've been to the border and talked with the agents, the cartels seem to have tremendous control over what happens.
If I may,
After
Congressman,
Sir, I only have 1 minute and 16 seconds left.
Gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to the order of the committee of today, the committee stands in recess for approximately 5 minutes.
Secretary Mayorkas, do you support the GOP plan for the border?
Congressman, I very much look forward to working in a bipartisan way to address the need to enhance our border security.
I guess, do you know what the GOP plan is for the border?
I do not. I want to work in a bipartisan way to address what is a unanimously understood to be a broken immigration system.
I agree, Secretary, and my point is I've not heard a plan. I've just heard grievances. And finally, Director Wray.
Mr. Wray, I read in your testimony you consider domestic violent extremists to be the greatest threat to our health and well-being here in the United States. Do you stand by that?
The greatest threat to us in the homeland is lone actors in small cells, typically radicalized online, using easily accessible weapons against soft targets. That group includes two categories, both domestic violent extremists and homegrown violent extremists, which are foreign terrorist inspired. So they're very similar, but it's two big buckets.
Do you know how many fatalities we had in 2020 from DVEs?
Anarchist violent extremism, as well as militia violence.
Yeah, I think I read there was something like 4. And four is too many. You know, that's, you know, for the 4 people that died. Do you know how many people die per day from fentanyl overdose?
I don't have that figure.
The gentleman yields back. Let me just correct the record. 2019, most lethal year for DVE attacks. DEVs were responsible for 32 deaths in 2019.
Today, in fiscal year 22, you have now released over 1.4 million illegals into the United States. And my question to you now is, can you guarantee that none of those people have criminal records?
This enforcement work is not fun, Congresswoman. This is a noble profession in which people risk their lives to conduct it, and you know that very well.
All the righteous indignation. Here we go. So, in fact, you hold the record as Secretary of Homeland Security for the most encounters and subsequent releases into the United States in history. Your own former boss, Secretary Jay Johnson, said that 1,000 a day is considered a crisis. Today we're counting 7,000 a day. The facts and figures make the point for me. So is the border secure based on your feelings or facts?
Congresswoman, let me have the opportunity to correct a misstatement. 2.3, Congresswoman, we remain committed to enhancing the security of our border every single day.
That's not an answer.
Mr. Secretary, you're not going to answer the question. In fiscal year 2022, we had an estimated 600,000 gotaways. Do you believe this indicates a border that is not open?
Congressman, I would respectfully posit that I don't think that the 1.4 million people who were either removed or expelled
Mr. Secretary,
from the country would consider the border open.
I'm going to take back my time. In May, Kansas City law enforcement,
over years since 2018.
Mr. Secretary, you've done this all day. When you don't like a question, you filibuster. In my home state of Kansas, the state health department saw a 54% increase in drug overdoses in the first half of 2021, nearly half of which were caused by fentanyl, primarily supplied by the cartels.
Fentanyl has been increasing year over year since at least 2018. Certainly, this is not a new phenomenon.
Mr. Secretary,
it is not a new tragedy.
Mr. Secretary, you clearly don't understand the problem.
I clearly do.
Excuse me. This has nothing to do with politics. And the concern of my constituents back home is how can you begin to solve the problem if you don't even acknowledge the depth and breadth of it? Excuse me, Mr. Secretary. Have you had discussions with the president or anyone in the Biden administration about stepping down from your current role?
I have not.
I hope, for the sake of the safety of the American people, that conversation happens very soon. I yield back my time.
Now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Every American has entrusted your agencies with their safety and security, and this is your legacy. This is the legacy that you're going to leave behind. How many of these 600,000 people, can you assure the American people that not a single one of these 600,000 people are a threat to our safety, that they don't match the terror watch list, that they're not part of a criminal or transnational organization? That's what your agents have told me personally. So I'm just taking their word for it.
I have the benefit of a vantage point of what the entire border presents, as well as what we are doing about it. One of the things often
Secretary,
behind
answer
computers,
the question.
processing
How many of the 600,000 people? No, we have 2 minutes left.
I know, but I feel compelled to.
You don't have the
correct
time to do that. I want to know how many of the 600,000 people match the terror watch list.
Well, Congressman, by definition, they are gotaways.
Okay, so you don't know. And so how can you say that the border is secure? It's the American people aren't buying it. We're not buying it because the deaths that are happening in our communities, I've invited you to come with me. I was in Del Rio the day before you got there when the 15,000 Haitians were there. I've been to El Paso. I've been to the Rio Grande Valley. You're going to hear more on that later.
Briefly, and then I'll answer your question. It is very difficult to answer your question when I'm not given the opportunity to do so, number one.
As my colleagues have said.
And number two, I do feel compelled to correct inaccuracies that are contained in your question for the benefit of the American people.
The accuracies are, the facts that I have stated are reported by you and your department.
Congressman, so we are dedicated to resourcing the United States Border Patrol with the technology, using barriers advisedly where they are most beneficial.
Okay, that's not my question.
To deliver enhanced security.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for that. I've heard you say, and President Biden, and this is your legacy, okay? The American people can count. We can count. There's a humanitarian crisis at our southern border. I've been down there. You and President Biden have continued to ignore this problem, and fiscal year 22 was the deadliest year on record. More than 800 migrants died. Do you remember the 53 that died in a tractor trailer in the heat of July, south of San Antonio, Texas? This is the legacy. The American people are demanding that you secure the border.
Additionally, along with many Americans, I'm sad to say that I'm very concerned about reporting that an FBI agent, Timothy Thibault, if I said that correctly, may have suppressed derogatory information relevant to ongoing investigations relating to Hunter Biden, and he has a long history of partisanship, and he was quickly left the agency when these allegations came to light. I have to say I'm concerned about the overall state of the Bureau and increasingly partisan perception, right or wrong, of the Bureau. And you are the premier law enforcement agency, and I hope you can turn the ship around. And with that happy note, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, and I welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security. Our next witness will be Christopher Wray, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And our third and final witness will be Christine Avizade, Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Director Wray, what results on this domestic terrorism threat are you seeing from the lens of the FBI?
Well, certainly we have seen over the last several years, really going back to maybe the summer of 2019, an increase in domestic violent extremism. And we are concerned about the lethality, especially of racially motivated violent extremists and domestic violent extremism, with our state and local law enforcement partners in particular, who really become the eyes and ears that are so critical, because any one of them could have the one dot. Eyes and ears that are so critical because
Director Wray, about a third of the historically black colleges in this country over the last year have received bomb threats.
We have joint terrorism task forces working on it, 30 field offices, multiple headquarters divisions. It's very much ongoing. I think one of the things I did when I started in this job was that I said I was going to call every time an officer is shot and killed anywhere in the country in the line of duty. I was going to call the chief or the sheriff myself and express my condolences. And I've made way north of 200 of those calls. I mentioned law enforcement. It is a reality that an already dangerous profession, namely law enforcement, has become more dangerous. Last year was the highest number of law enforcement officers shot and killed in the line of duty since 9/11.
Tragically difficult year it has been for law enforcement. I want to reference one additional statistic, which is this year has seen the greatest number of ambushes against law enforcement officers.
And I chaired this committee, back in the day. And I want to, in my position of being a leader now in foreign affairs, with the collapse of Afghanistan and the threat, quite honestly, and the way it was done with the Taliban in charge of the evacuation, in charge of Kaya, a suicide bomber coming in and killing 13 servicemen and women, leaving Americans behind, leaving Afghan partners behind, getting Afghans on the planes that shouldn't have been on the airplanes that got into the United States because it was so chaotic. What worries me now is the situation at the border. The fact that it is wide open, and the combination of the Taliban taking over, Mr. Haqqani, a wanted terrorist, being their Minister of Interior, now Minister really of Security is what he is, harboring al-Zawahiri, who is bin Laden's top lieutenant, in his own house. And I applaud the administration for targeting him and taking him out.
From Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, a major threat to our homeland is clearly the arterial bleed at our southern border and the disintegration of our sovereignty down there. And the top threat to individual rights and freedoms for Americans from sea to shining sea, Mr. Wray, is the weaponization of the FBI against the American citizens that you've sworn to serve. Secretary Mayorkas, have you used your authority to retaliate against DHS agents who served on special details during the Trump administration, agents identified by your administration as conservatives or Trump supporters?
Once again, Congressman, I don't even know what you're referring to.
You're before Congress. I'm going to take that as a no. Through your authority, Secretary Mayorkas, have you encouraged your chain of command to suppress basic law enforcement actions at the border and harass or victimize or intimidate experienced frontline law enforcement agents at the border using internal investigations and threats of disciplinary action or transfer in order to force those agents to comply with DHS policies that actually injure the security of our homeland and are contrary to the sworn oath of those agents? Is that the culture you've created?
Congressman, I don't even know what you're referring to.
You will.
And I am
Secretary,
that is
you represent nobility,
dedicated.
Secretary Mayorkas?
Congressman, that is what I am dedicated to.
It's been rumored, Secretary, that you're going to resign prior to January the 3rd. Is any truth to those rumors?
That is a false rumor.
All right. We look forward to seeing you in January. Did the FBI have confidential human sources embedded within the January 6th protesters on January 6th of 2021? Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people, no, we did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol?
Gentleman's time has expired.
You should not read anything into my decision not to share information
Director Wray,
about confidential human
gentleman's
sources.
time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All of our witnesses are here today as guests of the committee to discuss threats to the homeland. As our guest, we owe our witnesses respect. And the subject matter of today's hearing deserves thoughtfulness. The chair encourages all members to be polite and to take today's worldwide threats hearing seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi for 5 minutes. Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, as we're here today speaking on threats to the homeland, these threats are magnified by our unsecured border. So we see that during a 2-year period, the number of encounters along our southwest border has increased over 520%. Just taking 2022 and 2021 combined, those 2 years in which you have been in charge of this agency, we see a number that exceeds 4 million But since I'm now down to 2 minutes, I want to focus my questioning specifically on the southwest border. You have said, a matter of fact, looking statistically, it seems like the border is getting worse. What will you help us do to make sure we get back to the levels that we saw in fiscal year 2020?
Guest, I very much look forward to working with you and this entire committee to enhance the security of our border. Let me give 2 examples of things that we are doing and 2 things that I think Congress can do. Number 1, we are taking it to the smugglers and the transnational criminal organizations at an unprecedented level. We have a disruption campaign, interagency disruption campaign that has led to more than 6,000 arrests, number 1. Number 2, if one takes a look at the program that we recently implemented, one takes a look at that program, and number 2, once and for all, pass immigration reform, including, for example, much needed reform to our asylum system. Everyone agrees the system is broken and we need it fixed.